Everybody's doing well. My name is Roger DeRozier, and I'm the state coordinator for the We the People program in Massachusetts. I'm your facilitator timer for today, and I'll let the judges introduce themselves.
Thank you, Roger. Please be seated. I think we'd be delighted to introduce ourselves and hear a little bit about you and your instructors, and then I'll read the question we've chosen for this morning's hearing, and then off we'll go. My name's Adam Packer. I'm a lawyer in Indianapolis.
I'm Joseph Byron. I'm a teacher in California.
And I'm Madeline Dunn. I'm Curator of Education and Historian for Delaware's Department of State.
Good afternoon, judges. We're from Reno High School. My name is Ashley Chan, and I'll be attending the University of Pacific this coming fall.
My name is Victor Munson, and I will be attending Seattle University.
My name is Abby Seeliger, and I'll be attending the University of Notre Dame.
Good morning. My name is Ray Cavallo. I will be attending the University of Washington. Our teacher is Mr. Richard Clark, and our unit coach is the famed political essayist Matthew Thornton.
Well, I'm now even more excited to hear what you have to say. If I had any idea. We've chosen question 2 for the hearing for this morning. Federalism is one of the unique features of American constitutionalism. How did the framers attempt to balance the powers granted to national and state governments? What are the costs and benefits of a federal system? Some critics argue that the United States is very much a union of states, jealous of their powers and resistant to incursions by the national government. Do you agree or disagree? What evidence can you offer in support of your response? Please begin.
In a speech to the New York Ratifying Convention, Alexander Hamilton stated, "This balance between the national and state governments ought to be dwelt on with peculiar attention, as it is of the utmost importance. It forms a double security to the people. If one encroaches on their rights, they will find a powerful protection in the other." Following the period of salutary neglect and the inefficient and weak central government created under the Articles of Confederation, the framers, like Hamilton, understood the necessity of allowing states to retain some forms of domestic sovereignty in order to create a more perfect union.
The states during this time period were functioning under a frail Congress that lacked the ability to regulate commerce between them, furthering their sense of independence. The delegates understood that the states would not easily share their power. In order to foster this necessity, James Madison included in the Bill of Rights the 10th Amendment, giving the states any powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states.
In order to allow the states to retain some power, Article 1, Section 9, which reads, "No tax or duties shall be laid on articles exported from any state." However, this new government must be based around checks and balances. Thus, the framers devised Article 1, Section 9 and 10. The new Constitution would also include the Supremacy Clause, which gives the federal government the ultimate power.
This clause was tested in the case McCulloch v. Maryland, in which Maryland attempted to place a tax on the Bank of the United States. The court held that Maryland's tax on the bank was unconstitutional because it violated Article 6. Federalism, according to James Madison, is a form of government in which power is divided and shared between central government and state and local governments. This system creates several benefits for the people of the United States, yet it also creates several inefficient costs for the functions of our government.
The recent implementation of online gambling and issues such as homosexual rights that demonstrate benefits and costs of the federal system. By allowing states to decide whether or not to implement such things, the national government is experimenting with laboratories of democracy within the states. This is the paramount benefit of the federal system because it allows the diverse and unique states to adapt to the interests of their constituents and allows the people to have a greater voice in their local government apart from the national level.
This can be seen in the 2014 online gambling pact between Delaware and Nevada. Now, players can sit at the same online table and bet with real money, which was previously prohibited by the Interstate Wire Act of 1961. In 2011, the U.S. Department of Justice released a formal legal opinion concluding interstate transmissions of wire communications that do not relate to a sporting event or contest fall outside the scope of the act.
The federal system also causes several inefficient costs to the functioning of a government. As Harvard professor Paul Peterson wrote in 1996, Congress made a mistake when it passed legislation that delegated responsibility for aid for families with dependent children to the states. With AFDC delegated to the state level, each state is forced into a position in which they compete with each other to be the least attractive to people who need welfare. This is a clear violation of the efficiency of federalism.
The federal system can prove to be quite costly, especially in situations where the state and national governments do not want to share power. In 1980, citizens of Nevada, as well as other western states, were up in arms over plans to base the controversial MX missile system within their states. Opponents contended that the 24,000 square miles needed for this project would displace many ranchers and farmers and preclude development of mineral and energy resources. It is clear that in some situations, the United States is very much a union of states, jealous of their powers and resistant to incursions by the national government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What role did the Senate traditionally have in preserving the balance of power between the states, and where do we stand on that today?
Well, originally, the Senate was elected by the state legislatures. So it was essentially the state's house. So the states had their representatives in Congress.
It wasn't until the 17th Amendment where the the Senate was elected by the people. And so now, like, with Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, who's the Senate Majority Leader, he's been able to keep controversial issues for Nevada, like out of Nevada, such as the Yucca Mountain.
And in regards to Yucca Mountain, in a lot of ways, the national government wanted to place this nuclear waste program within the state of Nevada, and Nevada, not having a large population to contend with a lot of other states, was able to use this equal representation within the Senate in order to essentially free our state from having to be the nation's trash can for nuclear waste.
So would you say that even despite the 17th Amendment, the Senate still retains its function as a protector of states' rights? Is that your contention?
Absolutely, and not just in regards to Yucca Mountain, but in regards to a lot of things that Nevada's had to deal with. The Senate, especially under Harry Reid, who is the Senate Majority Leader, has actually been really beneficial to keep Nevada essentially contending with other states that have such a large population, especially our neighbor, California.
All right. I want to go back to the development of the Federalist system, and I want you mentioned in your opening Hamilton, you had a Hamilton quote, you talked about Madison and the 10th Amendment, but if you look at Hamilton and in particular Madison, both of them going into the convention, did they anticipate a Federalist system? Were they happy with the Federalist system during the convention? Was that something that they wanted? How did that play out? Look at what they wanted going into the Constitutional Convention and what came out of it.
Well, Alexander Hamilton, actually, both of them came to the Constitutional Convention with their own plans for this government. Both their plans actually included a lot of systems that we still have today. For example, the New York plan under Alexander Hamilton actually included a quasi-electoral college system, which is in a lot of ways what we have today. And this idea of having the states be involved directly in the national government, but still having them separate and sharing power.
I agree with Victor, and with Madison, he came to the Constitutional Convention with his Virginia plan that had the universal idea of checks and balances and separate entities of power, which later developed into federalism.
And coming out of the Constitution, Madison and Hamilton teamed up to write the Federalist Papers, in which it was they were just trying to convince the citizens to adopt this idea of federalism, especially in the.
Yeah, but were they personally happy with the system? Were they happy with the compromises that were made?
Well, as they were living together in an apartment in New York, writing the Federalist Papers, the common words that come up through the Federalist Papers is this idea of a double security, which we mentioned in our testimony, and the idea that the national government, if it attempted to violate the rights of the people, the state governments would then step in, and if the state governments attempted to violate the rights of the citizens, then the national government would step in.
And Madison was very happy with it. Not originally at the start. During the convention, he was very upset with the idea of a Bill of Rights, because he thought that the states had a sufficient Bill of Rights under their own constitutions. Right? But later, when Madison and Hamilton later disagreed during the Helveticus and Pacificus debates, Madison did agree with the federal Bill of Rights.
In Article 6, Section 2, when it talks about the supremacy clause, why do you think it is still necessary for national and state elected officials and judges to continue to take an oath of allegiance to the Constitution?
Well, the Constitution itself is this sort of social contract in the fact that the people who are going to be representing us and going to be protecting our rights, the people need to be confident in the fact that they're going to follow the Constitution and not extend their powers to the point where the rights of the people are violated.
Just as us American citizens have our preamble, which is our own sort of personal oath to our own social contract of America, higher positions as judges and the president, for example, have their own oath to swear to their own position to give confidence to citizens that they are fulfilling their duties.
Article 6 gives us like that Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and that no one's allowed to break that law. So like when Richard Nixon, when he broke the law, I mean, he had to be punished because no one can break the social contracts. Like in U.S. v. Nixon, when he said, "Oh, the president has privacy even in regards to national security." It's like, no, you don't. You need to obey the law.
What did the Anti-Federalists think about the necessary and proper clause, and were they right now looking back over history?
Well, Brutus I argued that the necessary and proper clause would allow the federal government to provide for things like a standing army, which would be that grand engine of oppression. And so they were very against the necessary and proper clause at the time.
However, the necessary and proper clause is one of the main things that we learned from the Articles of Confederation, understanding that the government under the Articles of Confederation could not create all laws necessary and proper. So the framers, when they were creating this, needed essentially to change that system to give us the ability to create such things as a standing army in order to create a more beneficial and perfect union.
Also, the Constitution itself is a living document, so the fact that the necessary and proper clause is in there, it allows for such things as the assumption of privacy in the Constitution, that the fact that you can always reinterpret it to have to apply to current events today.
Which, to answer your question, is extremely important in today's system, and the Anti-Federalist fears of the necessary and proper clause were not necessarily they're not necessarily needed and expressed today in the same way.
So I get that the necessary and proper clause is important for general welfare, but has it shifted the balance of power between the national government?
Right.
All right, good job. This happened to me like 3 times yesterday. There must be something about the rhythm that we have as judges where I always get stuck asking the last question right at the buzzer. So we can talk about that some other time. Maybe you'll run into me sometime on a road trip from Notre Dame and we'll talk about it. Great job. I love the Nevada examples. That's something that I'm hungry to hear what your perspective is from your state. I suspect if I asked, and maybe I will ask everybody the question about the 17th Amendment in the Senate, that nobody else would give me that answer. That everyone else would say the 17th Amendment has meant that states have less of a voice in the federal government. You guys have a different story because one of your senators is the Senate Majority Leader. And so of course he can protect Nevada, but what about Delaware? What about Indiana? What about California? In the Senate, they don't have as much power. So it was really interesting to hear your perspective on that because it hasn't really affected Nevada. Nevada still has a strong voice in the Senate from protecting the state perspective. So that was a fascinating answer, and I think from your perspective, it was the right answer. I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Yeah, I thought you did a good job in your opening of outlining the costs and benefits. I felt like you could have done a little bit more on the resistance examples. I mean, you talked about the missile system and that, but I thought there was a lot more you could have gone to there. And then in the opening, in the first part, you talked about Article 1, Section 8, 9, and 10, but I felt like you could have maybe explained a little bit more how those different sections affected the balance of power between the national government. Just give a little bit more detail there. And then in the follow-up on my question about Madison and Hamilton and what they wanted going in and what they ended up with, I think you're right in a lot of ways, but Hamilton and Madison were both very staunch nationalists. Madison, before the convention, wrote the Vices, and it was all about the states were the problem and we needed to give. And if we look at the Virginia Plan, it's true there was separation of powers, that there was this idea of separation of powers in there, but it had a national veto of state laws, it had proportional representation in both houses of Congress, and it had no list of national powers. He wanted it to be plenary powers, all the power was going to be shifted to the national government because he saw the states as a problem. And so even though he's defending it in the Federalist Papers, he's really disappointed with many of those compromises. It's not what he anticipated. And so it's probably not fair to call him the father of that, especially federalism. Okay?
I agree with my colleagues, but I also would like to compliment you on a well-organized opening statement. It was very easy to follow, and something that I valued was you just didn't cite off particular information. You tied it into your premise, and I regret that we didn't have more time to continue, because what came to my mind is the phrase that many delegates from the ratification conventions expressed, that this is a topic that was maturely deliberated. So I wanted to thank